Oh, that was magnificent. That was the Song of Creation by Left and Right Ministries. That is Lyndon and Ruth Mitchell. And thank them both for such an amazing ministry and amazing work that they do to bless us. Welcome to Remnant Radio Ministries. I am Saul DePaul, and I thought that would be a great introductory song today for our topic at hand. And today we're going to be talking about a summary of 200 proofs that the Earth is not a round spinning ball. And this is from someone who is not a believer, from my understanding, although that is possibly changed by now. I'm not 100% sure of this, but there's a gentleman named Eric Dubay, and he has put together a compilation of 200 proofs that the Earth is not a round spinning ball. And these are summarized in this summary that I've posted as part of my Substack article and part of my website on remnantradioministries.com. And so I wanted to walk through some of these today with you. We can show a few of them as well. Obviously, I won't be going through all 200, but the summary will give you a good structure for some of the main themes that you'll see. And there will be some repetition from prior work that we've gone through up to this point. So some of the areas that we'll cover, empirical and observational inconsistencies between what we're seeing in the reality of science and physics and math and what, we expect to see within the heliocentric model. So there's inconsistencies there. The physics and natural law argumentation, atmospheric and aerial evidence, the nautical and navigational contradictions, astronomical anomalies, scientific deception, and institutional distrust, and the biblical and ancient textual support will be layered throughout, even though Eric didn't explicitly bring these up in his arguments. So, again, Eric not being a biblical scholar, unwittingly, he has given us some teachings that align to biblical cosmology as we walk through them. So let's go through some of those. So the first one is that the Earth as a fixed and immovable and foundational object is motionless, not spinning or orbiting anything. And the scriptural support, which we've covered in prior work, includes the world is also firmly established and it shall not be moved, from Psalm 93:1. And he has founded the earth upon its foundation so that it should not be moved forever. And that is Psalm 104:5. This directly refutes the idea of a spinning, orbiting earth. And Dubay refers to centuries of failed attempts to detect motion. And there's a couple of these listed here. I've mentioned the Michelson-Morley experiment in the past, and that is clearly one that will stand the test of time. It is never proven any kind of movement. The second is we live in an enclosed system with a firmament above, and scripture will call that firmament, the word rakia also can be described as a dome, but it is certainly firm. And we've, of course, covered this in a lot of detail before from Genesis 1:6. And we've also covered the Psalms where we talk about waters above the heavens. So Dubay asserts repeatedly that the Earth exists within an enclosed system with no evidence for the infinite vacuum of space, which aligns with the Genesis 1 model. There is no observable curvature. And this is true both with high altitude photography as well as long distances that are visible across bodies of water and other flat surfaces. And we see this in a variety of ways. When you go through the 200 proofs, if you do watch this video, you'll experience how many, those myriad tests that have been run that debunk the idea of curvature, especially on the order that we would expect given the Earth curve formula and given the size of Earth that we're told. So in terms of seeing things that should be blocked by the bulge of either water or land, by many hundreds, if not thousands of feet, sometimes miles of missing curvature are in some of these situations. So the scriptural echo is, who sits above the circle of the earth, and its inhabitants are like grasshoppers. Isaiah 40:22. And of course, we've covered the fact that the word hug here means circle, compass, not a sphere. And Dubé reiterates that the curvature would hide distant objects, yet we routinely see them. And this is one of the most repeated and data-backed categories in this presentation. The sun, the moon, and the stars in local motion. So the luminaries move above a fixed earth, not vice versa. And then the scriptural support there, Genesis 1:16, is that God made the two great lights, the greater light to rule the day and the lesser light to rule the night. And in Ecclesiastes 1:5, the sun also rises and the sun goes down and hastens to the place where it arose. Dubé argues that daily sun motion supports geocentrism, not Earth rotation, and supports the idea the sun and the moon are local, close, and move in circles above the Earth. Now, this is an often spoken and cited statement that water always seeks its level. And this is something that is true. It's provably true because we can use water in levels. Water always seeks its level. We see that oceans and lakes are level. They don't curve around a ball. And I've made the statement previously that if you go to a mountain lake on a calm day or morning and look at a picture of across the lake and see a mountain behind the lake, it'll oftentimes look like a direct mirror reflection or image. If there were any kind of curvature over long distances of water, especially on that calm day where there's no wind, you would see a bulge, which would create kind of a bending of light and kind of like a mirror in a one of those fairs where you walk in and it's kind of a crazy mirror where you see a reflection of your face and it looks a little bit warped, either concave up or concave down in terms of being shrunk or expanded, and it looks funny and silly. Well, that's not what we see. What we see is a very direct mirror image, almost a perfect mirror image, depending on how calm the lake is. So while this is not a direct Torah reference, this connects with the consistency and orderliness described in Proverbs 8:29. He assigned the sea its limits so that its waters would not transgress his command. Well, we also know that water reaches a level in that sense. NASA and the space lie. The claim is that NASA and global space agencies are involved in long-standing deceptions. The scriptural implication is the whole world lies under the sway of the wicked one, 1 John 5:19. And Exodus 20:16 as a witness says, "You shall not bear false witness." So we do know that there are people who will lie to us. This is scripturally accurate. And we know that the God of this world is the father of the lie. So why would we expect not to be lied to? So while it's not specifically cited, Dubé's accusations like image tampering, the computer graphics that are used for imagery of spatial situations, whether it be Earth or other objects further out, scientific censorship, these align with this view that the Earth is sacred, and that deception on a global scale, of course, is sin. Some of the other intriguing claims supporting a flat Earth model: flight paths in the southern hemisphere don't make sense on a globe, but align on flat maps. The gyroscopes and spirit levels show no curvature or spin. That's one we'll look at, I think, in more detail and get into. There's no measurable curvature from the standpoint of an airplane flying across a flat level plane over long distances with instrumentation like the gyroscope. You would expect to see some nosing down. You would expect to see this kind of fall off where the plane would need to sort of chase the curvature by pointing down. as it flies at great speed across the, let's say, curve of the Earth. But we don't see that, and we can't detect that at all. Polaris's fixed position and long-term visibility contradict axial precession. So what we're seeing is Polaris remains exactly in the same spot year after year after year, and that there's no change in the position over long periods of time. This runs counter to this idea that we're on a kind of precession of the axis. The inability to replicate the Earth's curvature through practical experimentation underlines the entire model. And this is what I've been saying really this entire series, is that without being able to scientifically prove any sort of curvature over the distances that we've been speaking about, that would imply that there is no curvature. Where the hosts or opponents miss the mark if debated. So this is a hypothetical. It's basically saying, if we were to debate on this topic, then typically you're going to run into these sorts of arguments. The first is that someone who is countering the idea of biblical cosmology is misinterpreting the circle of the earth, implying a globe, which is the misunderstanding of the Hebrew word that is part of Isaiah 40. Failure to engage in the empirical arguments, which includes sightlines, curvature math, and optical physics. Understanding the fact that a ball of a certain size has certain geometric points that you should be able to measure at a certain distance. It's something that I've never seen a scientist engage on, and the fact that the math doesn't work disproves the whole model, and they kind of dismiss it because they can't rationally challenge that. Also, the optical physics, which includes the angular resolution of the eye versus, a camera being able to zoom into things that supposedly are disappearing behind a curve that are not, being able to see too far. The ignoring of firmament-based texts for the more biblically aligned people from Genesis 1, Ezekiel 1, and then saying that, it represents something other than what it actually means. So we have to ignore the Hebrew word. We have to ignore the meanings of the words. We'll make them either spiritualizing them, which is to say they're not physical, they're not real, and they're metaphor. Lack of familiarity with the historical cosmology, which was held by the ancient Hebrews and other church fathers, and I would say for most of the world, they held to the belief system of a enclosed firmament Earth, which was not a sphere. No one believed it was a sphere for many thousands of years, and that in writing these texts, that the worldview and the understanding of those people was that it was a biblical cosmological system, not a heliocentric model system, which didn't appear until many hundreds of years, thousands of years later. Dubé's 200 proofs don't just critique the mainstream science, it revives the ancient cosmological worldview as seen throughout Torah and Tanakh, and his conclusions reflect the plain reading of Genesis and other scripture. Meaning that we live in a geocentric, domed, non-rotating Earth, and a model that the Hebrew patriarchs, Enoch, and early Israelites would have not only recognized, they would have firmly believed in. Okay, so now that's some of the the biblical side of things. Let's talk about the scientific focused proof categories. Okay, the first is that the observational geometry and horizon visibility, which is proofs 1 through 20 and 36 through 50, are 1. There's a flat horizon argument. The horizon always appears perfectly flat and rises to eye level at any altitude, contradicting expected curvature. There's no downward curvature, so objects at distances beyond curvature thresholds are still visible when they should not be. There's the zoom lens evidence. With optical magnification, distant objects lost to curvature reappear, challenging the notion of a globe. There is no measurable curvature. Despite globe math models, measurable curvature is not detected across lakes, oceans, and canals. The second category of proofs, fluid dynamics and water surface behavior. So proof 6, 11, 14, 16 to 18, and 40 are water finds its level. So all large bodies of water are level, and there's no natural curvature observed across massive spans, including, for example, the Suez Canal. Water can't stick to a ball, so alleged contradictions between gravitational pull and the cohesive behavior of water on a spinning sphere are discussed in some of these proofs. Gyroscopic and inertial mechanics, proofs 94 to 102. The plane flight paths and gyroscope tests suggest no measurable curvature or rotation. Gyroscopes remain level and unchanged. The inertial drift absence, no measurable Coriolis effect on airplane or artillery trajectories, which should occur on a rotating globe. And I've mentioned this before, there's no Coriolis effect that's being used by a sniper in a wartime scenario. No one is adjusting for curvature or movement. Air travel, flight paths, and navigation, some of the flight anomalies, certain long-distance flights, especially in the southern hemisphere, where potentially there could be more land, potentially where the GPS coordinates don't 100% map to the location on the map that's being shown, because of things like emergency landings where the plane ends up in a very far north location compared to where the flight path was actually showing you. But a lot of these make sense only in a flat Earth projection map, which is called the azimuthally equidistant or AE map. And in those cases, all of these flight paths tend to look like straight lines on an AE map. The flight navigation logic, pilots and autopilot systems do not account for curvature when maintaining altitude, no constant nosedive required. Impossible curvature drop. Planes would need to continually descend thousands of feet to follow the curve on a globe, which does not actually happen in reality. The fifth category is that there's no visual evidence of Earth's spin. So the proofs 103 to 110, there's no sense of rotation. The Earth's alleged 1,000 mile an hour spin, 66,600 mile an hour solar orbit, and 500,000 plus mile an hour galactic travel is undetectable by human senses or instrumentation. You could make a case, and I've heard it said, that this is due to inertia and gravity. And so because of gravity, we don't feel any of these forces, we don't feel any of these speeds. But one thing I would point out, there's a few things I would point out, but one of them is that the Earth is not following a circle trajectory around the sun. It's actually an ellipse or an elliptical orbit, which means it's speeding up and slowing down, and that's called acceleration. When you accelerate, you're going to experience a force, and that force would typically pull you or push you. And when dealing with these speeds, you're dealing with massive forces that are not being sensed or felt in any way, shape, or form. The other point is that as all these different bodies and objects are traveling in various ways around various things, there's, I think, 80 some odd bodies within just our solar system, the solar system itself, following around the Milky Way galaxy, and the Milky Way itself moving around a bunch of other galaxies, supposedly, and nothing ever changes in the sky. Everything is in exactly the same place, and we never experience any sort of change in the constellations themselves. So the constellations are always exactly the same and in exactly the same place, year after year, decade after decade, century after century, and millennia after millennia. We see exactly the same constellations with all of these forces. And back to the three body problem we talked about, I think in the last video, where we can't even model this in a computer with three bodies. It doesn't actually work because it turns into a chaotic system, and the gravity can't explain this. So clearly there's something wrong with the perspective of all of these things, kind of coming together in exactly the same way year after year. But so no sense of rotation. We don't feel or experience any kind of force with regard to rotation. The stillness of the atmosphere, Again, that's an inertia argument that the atmosphere is traveling along with the spin of the Earth. And so that's why we don't feel anything. It's kind of like if you're traveling in a car and the windows are shut, you don't experience the wind outside. But as soon as you open the windows, it gets windy. If you have a convertible, you roll down the convertible, obviously it's more windy. The point being that as you're flying through space at a delta of speed, you're going to feel that kind of speed. But we see no atmospheric movement. We see wind, but the wind is actually moving. And I mentioned this in a prior video, in circles on an azimuthally equidistant map of the Earth. So when it comes to things like long-range sniping, balloon launches, if you launch a balloon in one location and it drops to another location, there's no spin of the Earth involved in the balloon launch and fall. And drone recordings show no compensation for Earth spin. So objects that are helicopters too, objects that go up barely are moving relative to the Earth, and they go up a certain height and they basically stay where they are relative to the Earth. They can move obviously in a given direction. Wind velocity will make it an impact on where they go and how far they go. Is it a headwind or a tailwind and so forth? But at the end of the day, there's no spin. It's perfectly still. The pendulum and Coriolis errors, inconsistencies in Foucault pendulum behaviors and projectile paths challenge mainstream rational rotational models. This is something that you can explore in proofs 103 to 110. The sixth category, astronomical misalignments and illogical models, from proofs 121 to 135. The first is star trails in Polaris. So star trails form perfect concentric circles around Polaris. On a spinning Earth, star positions would shift drastically. And this is related to the second bullet, which is the lack of parallax. In a prior video, I mentioned parallax is like when you're driving down the road on a highway and you're going 65 miles an hour, let's say, and next to you witness the trees that are closer flying by. They seem to be moving faster than the trees that are a little bit further down up the hill, perhaps, that are even slower than the ones beyond that up on the top of the hill, or maybe there's another hill behind it, maybe another half a mile away. And of course, those trees are moving very slowly relative to the closer trees. That observation is obviously an optical illusion that we call parallax. Parallax implies that things that are closer, objects that are closer, are moving faster by you because they're closer. But this is more of the optical illusion of perspective. So in an environment where we're supposedly flying through space at all of these different speeds and all of these different movements, what we notice is that over many hundreds and thousands of years, there's no parallax. That is in and of itself impossible in a heliocentric model of the universe. We should see some stars moving faster than others, kind of like the trees. If they're closer than other trees that are further, some stars are clearly closer, according to what they tell us, than others. What if they're all in the same firmament layer above and rotating over our heads in circular patterns that reset every year? So the solar eclipse problems. Dubé asserts the size and distance ratios required for solar eclipses are coincidental and improbable. And I would say just the sun and the moon being exactly the same size in the sky to the naked eye, where the sun is supposedly 400 times further and 400 times larger in a cosmic coincidence. This is another issue, but it clearly manifests in the eclipsing. Satellite and space hoax evidence. There are no real photos of Earth, I would say. The images are images. Images are paintings, they're Photoshop, they're conjured up through creativity and digital artwork that is done by people whose job it is to create illustrations of what they think should be in the stellar universe. Now, The Earth itself, we have no photos of Earth that haven't been doctored, and we have evidence of doctoring of a couple of photos that were allegedly photos. But the other issue is we have a number of official images that clearly are photoshopped in compilations of data tied together, and we talked about that in one of the videos recently. In the satellite piece, there's a lot of people who are stuck on satellites and that being a proof that we live on a round spinning ball. There's a question of how satellites float in space in the first place and avoid burning up or remain in precise orbits. But we've also shown that there's been some attempt to make people think that satellites are flying by lighting up some kind of high altitude planes and then flying them overhead. And this is not the case because of the reasons that we detailed in the prior videos. But these are additional proofs that are in 140 to 160 as a category. The 8th category is proofs 30 to 39, the engineering and surveying anomalies. And this is actually really important. A lot of people don't think about when you're doing bridge and rail construction and you're building something large like the Panama Canal, the Suez Canal, and you're trying to create railways that go across large sections of Earth. There is no budgeting of material, and there is no accounting for design that would say we have any curvature at all. Everything is flat and level in terms of the materials, in terms of the engineering, in terms of the design. There's no accounting for curvature, which when you're dealing with many, many miles of road or miles of bridge or miles of railway, you would see that in the material. Because when you're dealing with the curve is longer than a flat surface. The shortest distance between any 2 points is a straight line. So when you assume that it's a straight level plane and it takes up a certain amount of material, then that would prove it's flat. But as soon as you say, well, there's curvature there, then that curvature is going to need to take up more material because it's a longer distance that needs to be covered. That is never factored in to any of these sorts of projects. Again, proving that it's flat. Military targeting, long-term artillery, naval operations ignore curvature, aiming and calculating over assumed flat planes. Now, I would add anything to do with fighter pilots and jets moving at very fast speeds when they're looking across the plane of the attack surface and they're looking at potential enemy vectors. They're looking at certain altitudes and they're looking at certain ranges. They never factor curvature into those calculations. So they're always looking out over long distances, maybe at different ranges of altitude, but never factoring curvature into the targeting of those operations. The 9th category is ballistics, optics, and perspective limits. Perspective constraints, sunsets, ship disappearances, and visual drop-offs are explained as optical perspective limits, not curvature. And laser and telescope experiments claim that lasers and telescopic observations reach targets beyond supposed Earth curve distances. These are in proofs 51 to 70. In the 10th category, there's no authentic global evidence in proofs 172 to 200. So as Eric kind of wraps up this video and gets towards the tail end of it, he gets more into some of these sort of global evidence contradictions. The photos and the CGI, all the Earth images are considered fake or stitched together. The NASA contradictions, the statements by astronauts and discrepancies in footage challenge mainstream space narratives. And then the vacuum and pressure conflict, the assertion that we live in a pressurized Earth atmosphere could not exist adjacent to the vacuum of space without a barrier. And there are sample high-impact proofs by type. We'll go through some of these, and I'll share some of the videos in a minute. The horizon flatness, the horizon always rises to eye level regardless of altitude. So if you're on a ball and you start to raise on top of the ball by elevating yourself above that surface, you should be able to see down over the curve, which would imply a lowering of the horizon, but the horizon always rises as you raise up. So that's something that's a little hard to kind of visualize, but it is in fact a proof. The zoom and refraction limits, boats disappearing, can be re-seen with zooming in using better optics, challenging the curvature. Flight paths, southern hemisphere flights have illogical paths on a globe, but they have perfectly logical paths on an AE map, and they typically are straight lines from A to B. There's no evidence of spin, there's no visual drift of stars, the sun supports a stationary Earth model. The water always reaching its level, the ocean and canal measurements show no convexivity. There's gyroscopic evidence. Gyros show no rotation or curvature over long distances. Lack of space photos. We've covered this in great detail. NASA admits Earth images are composites and not real photos. And there's no atmospheric boundary. The atmosphere should escape into space, and the pressure gradient is not explained. Okay. And then there's a brief summary here that covers things like the core thesis, and that we have a failure of modern science to demonstrate any kind of curvature relating to the size and shape of the Earth as mentioned in science textbooks. There's no evidence of motion, and the heliocentric mechanics cannot be detected through any observable or repeatable tests. Okay, so why don't we pivot here to get into some of the proofs that are in the video. So I think let's look at the flat horizon always appears level, and we'll start here at 119.
Consistently level surfaces would not exist here. But since Earth is in fact an extended flat plane, this fundamental physical property of fluids, finding and remaining level, is consistent with experience and common sense. 4. Rivers run down to sea level, finding the easiest course, north, south, east, west, and all other intermediary directions over the Earth at the same time. If Earth were truly a spinning ball, then many of these rivers would be impossibly flowing uphill. For example, the Mississippi, in its 3,000 miles, would have to ascend 11 miles before reaching the Gulf of Mexico. 5. One portion of the Nile River flows for 1,000 miles with a fall of only 1 foot. Parts of the West African Congo, according to the supposed inclination and movement of the ball Earth, would be sometimes running uphill and sometimes down. This would also be the case for the Parana, Paraguay, and other long rivers. 6. If Earth were a ball 25,000 miles in circumference, as NASA and modern astronomy claim, spherical trigonometry dictates the surface of all standing water must curve downward an easily measurable 8 inches per mile multiplied by the square of the distance. This means along a 6-mile channel of standing water, the Earth would dip 6 feet on either end from the central peak. Every time such experiments have been conducted, however, standing water has proven to be perfectly level.
I actually think this is a cool picture when you look at the bottom part and you compare it to the top. The top is what we see, but the bottom is what we'd expect to see. And that's really interesting because we never see any kind of curvature off in the horizon at very great distances. It should be just slightly off. Let me look down here and see where, okay, so 150, looks like we kind of went past that. I'm using my chat GPT to tell me where some of these areas are. Let's look at weather balloon footage showing a flat horizon at 4:45.
100 feet. Think of that, and then please credit engineers as not being quite such fools. Nothing of the sort is allowed. We no more think of allowing 600 feet for a line of 30 miles of railway or canal than of wasting our time trying to square the circle. 10. The London and Northwestern Railway forms a straight line, 180 miles long, between London and Liverpool. The railroad's highest point, midway at Birmingham Station, is only 250 feet above sea level. If the world were actually a globe, however, curving 8 inches per mile squared, the 180-mile stretch of rail would form an arc, with the center point at Birmingham raising over a mile, a full 5,400 feet above London and Liverpool. 11. A surveyor and engineer of 30 years, published in the Birmingham Weekly Mercury, stated, "I am thoroughly acquainted with the theory and practice of civil engineering. However bigoted some of our professors may be in the theory of surveying according to the prescribed rules, yet it is well known among us that such theoretical measurements are incapable of any practical illustration."
Yeah, I think my ChatGPT is a little bit off, so I'm not sure if I'm going to be able to track exactly to what we're looking for. But that was on the surveying side. Maybe this is around the balloon. Let's see what's happening here.
Be close upon 3 miles higher than a cord drawn from the two extremities. If such was the case, there is not a driver or stoker within the kingdom that would be found to take charge of the train. We can only laugh at those of your readers who seriously give us credit for such venturesome exploits as running trains round spherical curves. Horizontal curves on levels are dangerous enough. Vertical curves would be 1,000 times worse, and with our rolling stock, constructed as at present, physically impossible. 12. The Manchester Ship Canal Company, published in the
Okay, we still haven't seen what I'm looking for here, which is fine. Just going to keep looking down to see where some of these timestamps might be. Let's just go forward a little bit.
That if there were billions of stars, which are suns, the night sky would be filled completely with light. As Edgar Allan Poe said, "Were the succession of stars endless, then the background of the sky would present as a uniform luminosity, since there could exist absolutely no point in all that background at which would not exist a star."
Yeah, I think this has to do with how light is projected to disperse as it moves at distances. It's not meant to be a point of light like the way we see it, but it would actually disperse. And if you have, the distances that we're talking about, it would just be like one massive bright sky instead of what we're seeing.
In fact, Olber's paradox is no more a paradox than George Airy's experiment was a failure. Both are actually excellent refutations of the heliocentric spinning ball model. 18. The Michelson-Morley and Sagnac experiments attempted to measure the change in speed of light due to Earth's assumed motion through space. After measuring in every possible different direction in various locations, they failed to detect any significant change whatsoever, again proving the stationary geocentric model. 19. Tycho Brahe famously argued against the heliocentric theory in his time, positing that if the Earth revolved around the Sun, the change in relative position of the stars after 6 months' orbital motion could not fail to be seen. He argued that the stars should seem to separate as we approach, and come together as we recede. In actual fact, however, after 190 million miles of supposed orbit around the Sun, not a single inch of parallax can be detected in the stars, proving we have not moved at all. 20. If Earth were truly constantly spinning eastwards at over 1,000 miles per hour, vertically fired cannonballs and other projectiles should fall significantly due west. In actual fact, however, whenever this has been tested, vertically fired cannonballs shoot upwards an average of 14 seconds ascending, 14 seconds descending, and fall back to the ground no more than 2 feet away from the cannon, often directly back into the muzzle. 21. If the Earth were truly constantly spinning eastwards at over 1,000 miles per hour, helicopters and hot air balloons should be able to simply hover over the surface of the Earth and wait for their destinations to come to them. 22.
It's a really good point. Yeah, there were a few things in there. Obviously, the way this video is set up, you're just going to have to watch it and you'll probably get through, 10, 20 of these at a time, depending on how long you want to study them. But the idea that, yeah, there's no parallax was really interesting. You can see that there's nothing in those star trails. Um, Clearly, that's a problem for the heliocentric model. The idea that you could hover over a point using a helicopter and wait for the Earth to catch up to you, I think just proves the whole point of this, right? That this idea of inertia and the air just traveling with the Earth at all altitudes, all the way up to tens of thousands of feet. And there's just no detection of spin, there's no detection of motion. And you would expect something very different in a model where the Earth is rotating at those speeds. You would expect a large variation in wind speed as you go up further and you start to drift away from the Earth just by hovering. You don't need to do anything to keep up because there's no inertia that would propel you forward. Because as you get higher, the air would get thinner and there's nothing to move it forward. The other point I've made in prior videos is that as you look at the wind patterns, that the wind velocity and direction is actually counter to the spin. You would expect it to go the opposite direction and at a pretty good clip, but the wind is actually outrunning the spin of the Earth in the same direction as the spin. And so that's impossible as well. Let's move forward and see if we can find some other fun ones in here.
Others, while west-firing cannonballs should fall significantly closer. In actual fact, however, regardless of which direction cannons are fired, the distance covered is always the same. 25. If Earth and its atmosphere were constantly spinning eastwards over 1,000 miles per hour, then the average commercial airliner traveling 500 miles per hour should never be able to reach its eastward destinations before they come speeding up from behind. Likewise, westward destinations should be arrived at thrice the speed, but this is not the case. 26. Quoting Heaven and Earth by Gabrielle Henriette, if flying had been invented at the time of Copernicus, there is no doubt that he would have soon realized that his contention regarding the rotation of the Earth was wrong, on account of the relation existing between the speed of an aircraft and that of the Earth's rotation. If the Earth rotates, as it is said, at 1,000 miles an hour, and a plane flies in the same direction at only 500 miles, it is obvious that its place of destination will be farther removed every minute. On the other hand, if flying took place in the direction opposite to that of the rotation, a distance of 1,500 miles would be covered in 1 hour, instead of 500. Since the speed of the rotation is to be added to that of the plane. It could also be pointed out
these sorts of arguments get into a little complexity in terms of, some of the physics and math around airplanes taking off and landing and the relative velocities and motions. I know it can be a little complicated, but just be mindful that if the Earth is moving, the planes need to have something other than inertia to explain how they're able to keep up with the rotation of the Earth, especially at these very great speeds. And without adjusting for that, they would have crosswinds and runways flying by them at ridiculous speeds. They would never be able to land safely. So it's just another proof that we have a flat level surface and not a round spinning one.
Meteorological journal, both in the northeast and southeast trades, and has also often been observed by former voyagers. Captain Basil Hall witnessed it from the summits of the Peak of Tenerife, and Count Strzelecki, on ascending the volcanic mountain of Kirinea in Hawaii, reached at 4,000 feet an elevation above that of the trade wind, and experienced the influence of an opposite current of air of a different hydrometric and thermometric condition. Count Strzelecki further informed me of the following seemingly anomalous circumstance, that at the height of 6,000 feet he found the current of air blowing at right angles to both the lower strata, also of a differing hydrometric and thermometric condition, but warmer than the inner stratum. Such a state of the atmosphere is compatible only with the fact which other evidence has demonstrated, that the earth is at rest. 31. Quoting Zetetic Cosmogony, Thomas Winship states, "Let imagination picture to the mind what force air would have which was set in motion by a spherical body of 8,000 miles in diameter, which is..."
Yeah, some of these arguments are about the air movement. Let's go forward a little bit more. Let's look at some of these. These look like maps that we have that are kind of being mocked by a number of different organizations that include flat Earth designations.
South traveled testifies to the fact that the Earth is not a ball. 36. During Captain James Clark Ross's voyages around the Antarctic circumference, he often wrote in his journal, perplexed at how they routinely found themselves out of accordance with their charts, stating that they found themselves an average of 12 to 16 miles outside their reckoning every day, later on, further south, as much as 29 miles. 37. Lieutenant Charles Wilkes commanded a United States Navy exploration expedition to the Antarctic from 1838 to 1842, and in his journals also mentioned being consistently east of his reckoning, sometimes over 20 miles in less than 18 hours. 38. To quote Reverend Thomas Milner, "In the southern hemisphere, navigators to India have often fancied themselves east of the Cape when still west, and have been driven ashore on the African coast, which, according to their reckoning, lay behind them. This misfortune happened to a fine frigate, the Challenger, in 1845.
Yeah, some of these arguments have to do with the potentially larger landmass outside of, let's say, the 60th degree parallel. As you go further south, you have more potential land because the circle is larger. Also, notice some of the pictures there of the ice wall that are kind of pretty interesting. When you consider how high those pieces of land are and the ice chunks are in the Antarctic area. Let's move forward a little bit. Looks like some flight data here.
Most Johannesburg to Perth flights curiously stop over either in Dubai, Hong Kong, or Malaysia, all of which make no sense on the ball, but are completely understandable when mapped on a flat Earth. 46. On a ball Earth, Cape Town, South Africa, to Buenos Aires, Argentina, should be a straight shot over the Atlantic, following the same line of latitude across. But instead, every flight goes to connecting locations in the northern hemisphere first, stopping over anywhere from London to Turkey to Dubai. Once again, these make absolutely no sense on the globe, but are completely understandable options when mapped on a flat Earth. 47. On a ball Earth, Johannesburg, South Africa, to Sao Paulo, Brazil, should be a quick, straight shot along the 25th southern latitude, but instead, nearly every flight makes a refueling stop at the 50th degree north latitude in London first. The only reason such a ridiculous stopover works in reality is because the Earth is flat. 48.
Yeah, a lot of these southern flights don't make a lot of sense, and when you map them on a AE map, you'll actually see straight lines, and that's something that I don't see here, but that's okay. Let's move forward a little ways and see what we're talking about in this part.
Latitudes during Arctic summer, because the sun, at its innermost cycle, is circling tightly enough around the polar center that it remains visible above the horizon for someone at such a vantage point. Likewise, in extreme southern latitudes during Arctic summer, the sun completely disappears from view for over 2 months, because there at the northern tropic, at the innermost arc of its boomerang journey, the sun is circling the northern center too tightly to be seen from the southern circumference. 59. Quoting Gabrielle Henriette, "The theory of the rotation of the Earth may once and for all be definitely disposed of as impracticable by pointing out the following inadvertence. It is said that the rotation takes 24 hours and that its speed is uniform, in which case, necessarily, days and nights should have an identical duration of 12 hours each all the year round. The sun should invariably rise in the morning and set in the evening at the same hours, with the result that it would be the equinox every day from the 1st of January to the 31st of December. One should stop and reflect on this before saying that the Earth has a movement of rotation. How does the system of gravitation account for the seasonal variations in the lengths of days and nights if the Earth...
And one thing I wanted to highlight here is that as the rotation of the sun and the moon in this simulation are going around in circles, this actually gives you a really good understanding of the movement that, as we understand it, in the biblical cosmological system, with the sun kind of going in and out of these circles, the moon sort of lagging by a certain amount. And then as the moon gets the furthest away, you'll see the full moon. As the moon gets closest, you'll see the new moon. And it actually disappears during that period. Okay, let's move forward here into another section.
1854, the Times newspaper reported the Queen's visit to Great Grimsby from Hull, recording they were able to see the 300-foot-tall dock tower from 70 miles away. On a ball...
Yeah, there's gonna be a lot of different curvature type math. Let's see what's over here in this section. Looks like interesting.
Apparent elevation of the light of 112 feet 8 inches. Since, however, there is not a difference of 100 hairs' breadths, we have a plain proof that the water of the Chesapeake Bay is not curved, which is a proof that the Earth is not a globe.
I just wanted to pause here and just take in this beautiful image. This is obviously a high altitude satellite video that is showing you a very flat level plane of Earth from this perspective. It's quite beautiful. And also, if you look at the top part of the video, you'll see how dark it looks. It's not like the brilliance of the stars are there. So there's no curvature. The stars kind of fade away as you get higher. And it's quite beautiful, but it's not what we've seen in those, how do I say, the doctored images or the fisheye lenses that are used at higher altitudes.
97. NASA and modern astronomy say the Earth is a giant ball tilted back, wobbling and spinning 1,000 miles per hour around its central axis, traveling 67,000 mile per hour circles around the Sun, spiraling 500,000 miles per hour around the Milky Way, while the entire galaxy rockets a ridiculous 670 million miles per hour through the universe, with all these motions originating from an alleged Big Bang cosmogenic explosion 14 billion years ago. That's a grand total of 670,568,000 miles per hour in several different directions we're all supposedly speeding along at simultaneously, yet no one has ever seen, felt, heard, measured, or proven a single one of these motions to exist whatsoever. 98. NASA and modern astronomy say Polaris, the North Pole star, is somewhere between 323 and 434 light years, or about 2 quadrillion miles away from us. Firstly, note that is between 1,938,000,000,000,000 and 2,604,000,000,000,000 miles, making a difference of over 600 trillion miles. If modern astronomy cannot even agree on the distance to stars within hundreds of trillions of miles, perhaps their science is flawed, and their theory needs re-examining. However, even granting them their obscurely distant stars, it is impossible for heliocentrists to explain how Polaris manages to always remain perfectly aligned straight above the North Pole throughout Earth's various alleged tilting, wobbling, rotating, and revolving motions. 99. Viewed from a ball Earth, Polaris, situated directly over the North Pole, should not be visible anywhere in the southern hemisphere. For Polaris to be seen from the southern hemisphere of a globular Earth, the observer would have to be somehow looking through the globe, and miles of land and sea would have to be transparent. Polaris has been seen, however, up to over 20 degrees south latitude. 100. If Earth were a ball, the Southern Cross and other southern constellations would all be visible at the same time from every longitude on the same latitude, as is the case in the north with Polaris and its surrounding constellations. Ursa Major and Minor, and many others can be seen from every northern meridian simultaneously, whereas in the south, constellations like the Southern Cross cannot. This proves the southern hemisphere is not turned under, as in the ball Earth model, but simply stretching further outwards away from the northern center point, as in the flat Earth model. 101. Sigma Octantis is claimed to be a southern central pole star similar to Polaris, around which the southern hemisphere stars all rotate around the opposite direction. Unlike Polaris, however, Sigma Octantis cannot be seen simultaneously from every point along the same latitude. It is not central, but allegedly 1 degree off-center. It is not motionless, and in fact cannot be seen at all using publicly available telescopes. There is legitimate speculation regarding whether Sigma Octantis even exists. Either way, the direction in which stars move overhead is based on perspective and the exact direction you're facing, not which hemisphere you're in.
All right, I think we're going to pause it here and take a break from this video. But there's 200 proofs. We've gone through a smattering of the first 100. And I think that the last one there, or the last couple, really point to this idea that if we're on a sphere with a hemisphere, then when you're south of a particular, let's say the equator being that midway point, and you're south of that, and you can see something that is fixed above the northernmost point, which is the Polaris star, clearly you're able to see that through a bunch of the Earth, which disproves the idea that it's a sphere. So these are all proofs that we can consider as we think about the various sorts of, let's reason together. There's way too much evidence here of the model just not fundamentally being what they say it is. So I think I just want to close here with just a few quick comments. As we think about and take in everything that's been discussed so far, there's quite a few biblical proofs that tie into this idea that we are in a kind of a geocentric universe where humans are at the center of creation, but down below on a certain floor of the model, right? We have the heavens, which are above. We have the earth at that kind of ground floor, and then there's sub-basement floors down beneath. What we see is a very large container for where humans are placed, and it's very beautiful. There's clearly heavens above, and within those heavens, we have the Word of God controlling those celestial bodies and having them keep a certain sort of contract with the creator of the universe. This is kind of like Torah. So the Torah that the celestial bodies are keeping is very much in line with this idea that all the things in the universe are obeying the Word of God and keeping the commandments of God to a very large extent. The one creature not really doing that very well is the human. And I would say a subset of the angels who sinned, according to Scripture. So when you consider the way the universe appears to be scientifically, measurably, provably flat and stationary and not in motion, we have objects in motion, but those are above our realm, if you will. And we have something called a firmament, which has waters above and waters below. As we get further into some of the biblical proofs, we can talk more about that in future episodes. But I wanted to take a little bit of time today and just reflect on some of the scientific proofs that we have that have been put forward as examples of where we live. And so far, there doesn't seem to be any real scientific proof to counter those. So I'll leave that with you for now. I think I'll sign off. This is Saul DePaul, Remnant Radio Ministries. If you did join me for this episode, I appreciate it and would love to hear from you if you have any feedback or comments. Hope you have a wonderful day. Take care. God bless.